The Zorixian Empire had long been a symbol of power and elegance, but the queen's heart was troubled. It was not the looming threat of other empires that weighed on her mind, but the news that had reached her ears just days ago. Her daughter, Princess Ilara, had returned to Zorix after years of absence. She was not alone, however. A human man accompanied her. The human, named Jason, had been a medic stationed on a distant planet where a diplomatic mission had gone terribly wrong. The princess had been gravely injured during a skirmish with hostile forces. It was Jason who had saved her, using his skills and technology to pull her from the brink of death. Though the circumstances of the mission were unclear, the queen could not ignore the fact that her daughter was alive, thanks to a human. The news spread through the royal palace like wildfire, causing murmurs of confusion, suspicion, and, in some corners, fear. Humans had only recently been discovered in the galaxy, and Zorixians had little understanding of them. While some were curious, many viewed humans with disdain, considering them primitive and uncivilized. Still, the queen's decision was final. The human would be allowed to stay but under watch. Princess Ilara had been an influential figure among the Zorixian people. Fierce, respected, and beautiful, she was known for her leadership on the battlefield and her wisdom in the council chambers. But her recent actions had left her torn. She had seen much of the galaxy in her travels, and her encounter with Jason had forever changed her perspective. He was different from the stories she'd heard of humans, not the brutish creatures the Zorixians had imagined. In her eyes, he was a hero. As Jason stood among the royal guards, waiting to be escorted to the royal chambers, he couldn't help but feel like an outsider. The palace was grand, its architecture a mix of towering spires and open courtyards, all carved from a unique material that shimmered under the alien sun. But despite the beauty surrounding him, he felt alien himself. His clothes were plain compared to the elaborate garments worn by the Zorixians. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. Ilara watched him from a distance, her heart conflicted. She had only just met Jason, but she felt an undeniable connection. His bravery, his selflessness in the face of danger, had earned her respect. Yet she was aware of the many eyes on them. To bring a human into the heart of Zorix's royal court was no small matter. Her mother, the queen, was already concerned, and some of the royal advisors had begun questioning the wisdom of such an alliance. The queen had always been a strict ruler, bound by tradition and custom. She believed in the power of her people and the strength of their unity. Yet, she also understood the harsh realities of politics and diplomacy. The galaxy was changing, and with it, so too would the Zorixian Empire. There were whispers of human technology, of advanced medicine, of ways to heal wounds and conquer diseases that the Zorixians could only dream of. If this human was truly capable of such feats, perhaps he could be more than just an ally. He could be a game-changer for the Empire. Despite the looming tension, the queen had always trusted her daughter's judgment. Ilara was strong and wise beyond her years, and if she believed this human had value, the queen would give him a chance, though she would keep a watchful eye on him. As night fell over the palace, the queen sat in her chambers pondering the future. The weight of leadership rested heavily on her shoulders. She had guided her people through wars, through famine, through countless trials, but this was different. The presence of a human, a species still largely unknown to the galaxy, could be a turning point. For better or for worse, it was a change she could not ignore. Jason, meanwhile, sat alone in a small room assigned to him by the palace staff. He tried to focus on the task at hand, finding some way to help the Zorixians to contribute. His medical expertise was in demand, and he hoped that by earning their trust, he could make a real difference. But he couldn't shake the feeling that his presence here was a catalyst for something much larger. The alien queen's daughter had trusted him with her life, and now, it seemed, the entire empire was watching him. He stood at the window, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The streets were quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. He wondered if in the end his presence here would lead to peace, or if it would unravel everything the Zorixian Empire had worked so hard to build. The next day, the queen would summon him. She had made her decision. Jason's future, in the Yadimo palace, was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, everything was about to change. Jason had barely slept the night before. His mind was filled with questions about the future, the mysterious alien queen, and the princess who had brought him here. He had been thrust into a world he didn't understand, yet something about the Zorixian people felt familiar, like he was on the edge of discovering something important. As he wandered through the halls of the palace the next morning, he couldn't help but marvel at the architecture. The walls were made of a strange, translucent material that seemed to shimmer in the light, reflecting the colors of the sky outside. It was both beautiful and alien, just like the people who lived here. The grandeur of the palace was overwhelming, yet Jason knew he couldn't let himself be distracted. He had a job to do. He found himself in a large courtyard, where Zorixian servants moved quietly, tending to plants that looked unlike anything he'd seen before. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers, and the sounds of distant voices echoed softly around him. He couldn't help but wonder about the kind of life the Zorixians led, separated from the rest of the galaxy. They were so advanced, yet so isolated. Princess Ilara found him there, her presence unmistakable even before he turned to face her. She moved with the grace of a trained warrior, and the strength in her posture told Jason that she was no stranger to command. Her eyes softened as she met his gaze, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. "You didn't sleep well, did you?" she asked, her voice a quiet whisper that only he could hear. Jason shrugged, trying to act casual. "I've been in worse places," he replied, offering a small smile. "But yeah, not much sleep." Ilara seemed to sense his unease. She took a step closer, her eyes scanning him carefully. "You're still not used to this, are you? The palace, the people, Zorix." Jason shook his head slowly. "No, I don't think I ever will be." He glanced around again, taking in the unfamiliar sights. "Everything's so different here. It's like another world." Ilara smiled faintly. "It is another world. That's what makes it special." They stood there for a moment in silence, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. Finally, Ilara broke the stillness. "Come. The Queen has summoned you," she said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. "She wants to speak with you about your future here." Jason nodded, his heart racing. He had been expecting this moment, but now that it was finally here, he wasn't sure what to think. The Queen's decision would change everything for him. He followed Ilara down the winding halls, past guards and servants who watched them silently. His nerves grew with every step. When they reached the Queen's chambers, the two of them were greeted by a pair of guards who stepped aside to let them in. The Queen sat at a grand table, her regal presence commanding the room. Her eyes were sharp and calculating, yet there was something about her that felt both distant and protective. Jason stood at the entrance, unsure of how to proceed. "Come, forward, human," the Queen said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I have heard much about you." Jason took a deep breath and stepped into the room. He felt the weight of her gaze on him, but he didn't flinch. He was here for a reason, and no matter how out of place he felt, he wouldn't back down. "Your daughter tells me you saved her life," the Queen continued, "and that you did so without hesitation. A human doing such a thing for a Zorixian is unexpected." Jason nodded, his throat dry. "I did what I had to do. Princess Ilara was hurt, and I couldn't just stand by." The Queen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer than before. "You have earned my daughter's trust and by extension mine. But do not think for a moment that this makes you a part of our world. You are an outsider, and I will not let your presence here disrupt the balance of our empire." Jason felt a pang of frustration, but he kept it hidden. He had expected this kind of response. Zorixians were proud and fiercely protective of their traditions. Still, there was something in the Queen's tone that told him she was not as unyielding as she appeared. "I understand," Jason replied, his voice steady. "But I don't want to disrupt anything. I just want to help." I'm not asking for a place in your empire. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be useful." The queen regarded him for a moment longer before nodding slightly. "You will have your chance, but know this. If you fail, there will be no place for you here." Jason's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't show it. He had been in tough situations before. This was just another challenge. "As for you, princess," the queen said, turning her gaze to Ilara, "I hope you know what you're doing. Bringing this human into the fold will not be without consequence." Ilara nodded, her expression serious but resolute. "I understand, mother, but Jason is not like other humans. He is different." The queen's eyes softened as she looked at her daughter, and for the first time Jason saw a flicker of something deeper in the queen's gaze, perhaps love, perhaps worry. It was hard to tell, but one thing was clear. The queen wasn't entirely opposed to the idea of Jason staying, even if she wouldn't admit it. "Very well," the queen said, rising from her seat. "You will stay for now, but you will be watched. Do not forget, your place, human." Jason nodded again, grateful for the chance. As he left the room with Ilara by his side, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger. A new chapter in his life was unfolding, and he had no idea where it would lead. Jason spent the following days in the royal palace trying to adjust to his new life among the Zorixians. He was still out of place, and the strange stares he received from many of the palace staff only reminded him of how different he was from the people around him. He tried to focus on his work as a medic, hoping that his skills would prove useful, but it was hard to ignore the tension that filled the air. Every corner of the palace seemed to carry whispers about him, about the human who had come to Zorix, and was now entwined in their royal affairs. Despite the cold reception from many, Princess Ilara had remained a constant presence by his side. She spent hours with him, showing him the ways of Zorixian life and culture, always careful not to overwhelm him. Jason appreciated her patience, but there was still much about her people that confused him. For instance, the way Zorixians communicated, with their eyes, or the manner in which they conducted business in silence before revealing their decisions. It was all so different from anything he had ever known. One afternoon, Ilara invited him to accompany her on a visit to a nearby settlement. It was a place where the Zorixians interacted with Earth's inhabitants who had recently come into contact with the Empire. This was a new initiative. Human settlements were allowed to coexist with Zorixian colonies, but tensions were still high. Jason agreed, eager for a change of pace and hoping to gain a better understanding of the delicate relationship between humans and Zorixians. The journey to the settlement was both beautiful and unsettling. They traveled by hovercraft, passing through fields of exotic plants and towering structures made of materials that Jason had never seen before. It was a landscape full of contrast, untamed beauty mixed with rigid design. As they reached the settlement, Jason noticed how the human population seemed disconnected, like outsiders on their own world. The Zorixians had integrated the humans into their society, but there were clear lines between the two. When they arrived at the central square, Jason was struck by the mixture of tension and curiosity in the air. Humans and Zorixians walked side by side, but there was no interaction between them, only a quiet understanding that their worlds were still separate. As they entered the main building, Ilara introduced Jason to the Zorixian overseer who governed the settlement. The overseer, a tall Zorixian male named Tellin, regarded Jason with an intense look that made him feel uneasy. There was something about Tellin's demeanor that made Jason realize how much danger lingered beneath the surface. Ilara and Tellin spoke in a language Jason could barely understand, though he tried his best to follow. As they talked about the future of the human settlements and their integration into Zorixian culture, Jason couldn't help but notice the way Tellin's eyes kept flicking toward him. It wasn't hostile, but there was something calculating about it, as if Tellin was assessing him in ways Jason couldn't yet comprehend. "Does it always feel this tense between your people and mine?" Jason asked quietly once they were alone again, walking toward the settlement's medical center. Ilara glanced at him, her face troubled. "Yes, But not always. There are many who still view humans as an unknown threat. The fear is rooted in history. The Zorixian Empire has never been on friendly terms with any outside species until recently, and even now, some are reluctant to accept humans. Jason nodded, deep in thought. I didn't expect it to be easy, but it's more than just fear, isn't it? There's a sense of distance, like no one is willing to take the first step. Ilara's face softened as she looked at him. You're right. It's complicated. Humans and Zorixians are too different. It will take time before trust is established, if it ever is. As they arrived at the medical center, Jason's attention shifted to the patients waiting for care. The humans, they seemed just as uneasy as he felt. There was no warmth in their eyes, only a silent plea for help, an unspoken desire for something more than what the Zorixian Empire had to offer. He immediately set to work, offering medical assistance to those in need. Despite the cold reception, the work gave him a sense of purpose. He couldn't fix everything, but at least he could make a difference where he could. Later, as they left the settlement and made their way back to the palace, Jason and Ilara spoke little. The weight of the visit had taken its toll on both of them. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but he didn't know what. There was an undercurrent of tension that he couldn't ignore, and though Ilara had tried to reassure him, he knew that this fragile peace was far from secure. Back at the palace, Jason returned to his quarters and found himself thinking about the larger picture. The Zorixian Empire, despite its power, was a society built on layers of tradition and unspoken rules. It wasn't just about helping them heal physically, it was about understanding how deeply embedded their history and fears were. Humans were an unknown to them, and even with his medical skills, Jason realized that healing these deeper wounds would take far more than just knowledge of medicine. It would require understanding, patience, and perhaps trust that he had yet to earn. As he sat alone in his room that evening, the weight of the future pressed down on him. He had been given a chance to change the course of history. But the question remained, could one human truly bridge the gap between two species so different, so distant from one another? He wasn't sure, but one thing was certain, he couldn't do it alone. The following days felt like a blur for Jason. The palace had become both a place of refuge and a cage. He was constantly watched by Zorixian guards and had little freedom to explore beyond the royal grounds. He understood the queen's need to protect her people, but he couldn't help but feel like a prisoner. Yet, despite the tension, there were moments that brought him closer to the Zorixians, particularly Princess Ilara. One evening, Ilara invited him to a private dinner in her chambers, a rare gesture of warmth in a place where every action seemed calculated and measured. Jason entered the room to find a meal laid out on a large table. The food was unlike anything he had ever seen. Strange fruits, delicate pastries, and meat that glistened under the soft light of the room. It was simple in its elegance, but everything in this world seemed designed to make him feel small, to remind him that he was an outsider. "Please sit," Ilara said with a smile, gesturing to the seat across from her. Her eyes held a softness that made Jason feel welcome, even though he knew their connection was still fragile. He took the seat and looked at the meal before him, trying to understand how he could possibly eat something so unfamiliar. "Thank you for inviting me," Jason said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. I wasn't sure what to expect." Ilara laughed softly, a sound that seemed to lift the weight in the room. "I know. It's all so strange, isn't it? The food, the people, even the air. It's not like Earth, but we make do." Jason looked at her, noticing how her smile seemed to put him at ease. "It's not easy being here. I'm still trying to understand everything. How you all live, how you think." Ilara's expression turned thoughtful as she regarded him. "I know, and I wish I could explain it better. Zorixian culture is complex. We don't always share our thoughts the way you do. We don't speak unless we truly have something to say." Jason nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The silence in the palace had become deafening at times. It was like everyone around him was carefully measuring their words, afraid to make the wrong move. He had spent his whole life surrounded by people who were quick to speak their minds, and now he was in a place where words had weight and consequences. As they ate, their conversation turned to lighter matters. They spoke of Earth, of Jason's life before he came to Zorix, of his family and the world he had left behind. Ilara listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face as he spoke. It was clear to Jason that she was trying to understand him, to learn more about the humans she had come to know so little about. When the meal ended, Ilara stood and walked to a large window that overlooked the palace gardens. The twin moons of Zorix hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The sight was beautiful, but it also reminded Jason of how far he was from home, how much he missed his family and the world he had once known. "I wonder if things will ever truly change," Ilara said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself, "the way humans and Zorixians see each other. Will we ever stop seeing you as an outsider?" Jason stood and joined her by the window, looking out at the gardens. "Maybe not. Maybe it'll take years, or even generations before we really understand each other. But I think the first step is trying. If we don't try, we'll never know." Ilara turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "You really think it's possible?" Jason met her gaze, feeling the weight of her question. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was different. He wasn't just trying to heal bodies. He was trying to heal a rift between two species, two cultures that had never truly been meant to coexist. "I think it's possible," Jason said slowly. "But it's not going to be easy. It's going to take time, patience, and understanding, and we can't do it alone. We need to help each other one step at a time." Ilara studied him for a moment, and then, to Jason's surprise, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. It was a sign of trust, of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. "I want to believe you," she said softly. "I really do." Jason looked at her, a sense of determination rising within him. "Then let's make it happen." As the night drew on, the two of them continued to talk. It wasn't a conversation filled with grand promises or declarations. It was simple, quiet, but it was real. For the first time since arriving on Zorix, Jason felt like he was beginning to understand something about the Zorixians, and perhaps for the first time, they were beginning to understand him too. The next morning, when Jason returned to the palace's medical bay, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between him and Ilara. Their connection had deepened, and with it his understanding of Zorix itself. There were still many challenges ahead, but for the first time Jason felt like he wasn't just an outsider in this strange world. He was beginning to find a place in it. He could only hope that this was the start of something bigger, something that could change not only his life but the future of the Zorixian Empire and the humans who had found their way to it. Jason had been on Zorix for several weeks now, and the palace had begun to feel more like home, though still far from familiar. His connection with Ilara had grown, and he could sense a change in the way the Zorixians treated him. The respect he had earned through his medical skills was undeniable, but there were still many who saw him as a curiosity, a human in a place where humans had never belonged. Ilara had become his anchor in this strange world, and together they had begun to uncover more about the history of the Zorixian Empire and the artifact that had been hidden for centuries. It had started as a conversation late one evening when Ilara mentioned her past. The princess had confessed that her people had a long history of dealings with humans, though much of it had been hidden away for fear of what it could mean. The artifact, a small device of unknown origin, had been passed down through generations. According to Ilara, it held the power to reshape the future of the Zorixian Empire, but its full potential had never been understood. The more they talked, the more Jason realized that this artifact might be the key to unlocking the true relationship between the Zorixians and humans. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Ilara and Jason decided to visit an ancient library located deep within the palace. It was a place few people were allowed to access, but as part of her royal duties, Ilara had been granted permission. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old parchment, and the shelves stretched high into the ceiling. The room was quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. "Where do we begin?" Jason asked, his voice reverberating softly in the vast room. Ilara moved to a large table at the center where ancient texts lay open, their pages yellowed with age. "We begin with what we know. The artifact is tied to the earliest days of the Empire. The first Zorixian rulers used it to secure their place in the galaxy, and for centuries, it was passed down as a symbol of power." Jason glanced at the poor texts. "And you think it can help us?" Ilara's eyes were dark with thought. "I believe it's our only hope. The artifact could be the key to forming a true alliance between humans and Zorixians, but only if we can understand its power." Jason nodded, even though a feeling of uncertainty lingered in his chest. He had always been a man of science, of medicine, of things that could be measured and proven. But here, on this alien world, there was so much that defied logic. The artifact, ancient and mysterious, could be a weapon or a bridge. Either way, it would change everything. They spent hours combing through the ancient texts, but despite their best efforts, they could not uncover any clear instructions on how to use the artifact. The more they read, the more it became apparent that the Zorixians had not fully understood it, even in their early years. The artifact had been treated as a relic, a symbol of power, but never fully understood. Frustration began to set in, and Jason could see the strain on Ilara's face. "What if we can't figure it out?" Jason asked, his voice low. "What if the artifact is just a myth?" Ilara paused, her fingers running over the pages in front of her. "It's not a myth. It can't be. It's too important to be a simple story." She looked up at him, her gaze steady. "We just need to keep searching. There has to be something we're missing." Jason watched her, admiring her determination. He had seen this side of Ilara before, the quiet strength that came when she believed in something. It reminded him of his own desire to make a difference, to find a way to bridge the gap between his people and the Zorixians. Suddenly, as he glanced over a particularly worn page, Jason spotted something unusual. The markings on the page were different from the rest. It wasn't written in the standard Zorixian script, but in a more ancient form. He pointed it out to Ilara, who immediately leaned over to examine it. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "This is a map to where the artifact was originally hidden." Jason's heart raced. The discovery could change everything. If they could find the original location of the artifact, they might be able to unlock its secrets and use its power for the good of both humans and Zorixians. Ilara stood up, pacing the room with newfound energy. "We need to act quickly. The tension between our people is growing. There are factions within the Empire who want to keep humans at arm's length, and they won't hesitate to destroy the artifact if they think it will give us an advantage." Jason nodded. "What's our next step?" Ilara looked at him, her face set with determination. "We follow the map. We find the artifact, and we make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Jason agreed without hesitation. He knew that finding the artifact was their only hope of bringing peace to Zorix and Earth. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing about this journey had been. As they left the library, the weight of the task ahead of them settled in. They weren't just searching for a powerful relic. They were searching for a way to unite two worlds that had been kept apart for far too long. The path would be dangerous, and they would have to face many obstacles, but they had come too far to turn back now. The Zorixian Empire was changing, and Jason was ready to be part of that change. He could only hope that the artifact held the key to a future where humans and Zorixians could work together, side by side, to build something better. The days following their discovery of the map were tense. Ilara and Jason knew they had little time before the factions within the Zorixian Empire began to take action. The tension between the humans and the Zorixians was growing, and any wrong move could send the entire situation into chaos. Ilara, however, was determined. She had spent her entire life serving her people, and now, with Jason by her side, she felt a spark of hope that she had not felt in years. They made their plans in secret, knowing that there would be eyes on them at every turn. Jason's medical duties continued as usual, but now his thoughts were consumed by the search for the artifact. There were whispers in the palace, and though most of the servants and guards remained loyal to the queen, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Every step he took, every move he made, seemed to be scrutinized. Ilara, despite her usual composure, also felt the weight of the palace's eyes on her. Her position as the princess had always been a source of strength, but now it was a burden. Her own people were divided. Some wanted peace, some wanted to maintain the old ways, and others were fearful of the changes that Jason's presence symbolized. The artifact was the key to bridging that divide, but she was unsure whether it would unite them or tear them apart. Late one evening, as the palace quieted, they made their move. With only a few loyal servants aware of their departure, they left through a hidden passage that led to the outer gates. Ilara and Jason, with little more than the map and their determination, set off toward the location marked in the ancient texts. The journey was far from easy. The path led them through dense forests and treacherous mountains, places where few dared to venture. The map they had uncovered was old, and many of the landmarks it showed had long since changed. Still, they pressed forward, relying on each other's strengths to navigate the harsh terrain. Jason, despite his lack of experience in these environments, proved invaluable. His medical knowledge kept them safe when injury or exhaustion struck. There were moments when they would pause to rest, and Jason would tend to the cuts and bruises they had collected along the way. His skills with herbs and natural remedies were helpful, even on an alien world. Ilara, in turn, guided them with the knowledge of the land, using her heightened senses to detect dangers before they could even see them. One night, as they sat by a campfire, the conversation turned to more personal matters. They spoke of their families, of Jason's quiet life back on Earth, where his father had been a mechanic and his mother a teacher. He spoke of his desire to help others, of how he had joined the medical field not just because it was his talent, but because it felt like the right thing to do. He shared his dreams of a world where people, regardless of where they came from, could work together toward a common goal. Ilara listened intently, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "My father, the queen," she began, "has always put the Empire first. Every decision, every sacrifice was for the good of Zorix. But she's never had the freedom to think beyond that, beyond the boundaries of what we've always known." Her voice grew softer. "I don't know what it would be like to live in a world without the constant weight of the throne. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, even now. The Empire is divided, Jason. I can't see a way to heal the rift." Jason reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Ilara. I'm here. I've seen what this place can offer, and I believe it can be better. We just have to find a way to get there together." Ilara's gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight of their mission seemed less heavy. But as the night drew on, they both knew that their journey was only beginning. The road ahead would be dangerous, and they were not the only ones searching for the artifact. The next morning, they continued their journey, the map now a symbol of hope and uncertainty. Every step they took brought them closer to the unknown location marked in the ancient texts. But with every mile, Jason felt the pressure of their mission grow. They were not just searching for a piece of technology. They were searching for a solution to the conflict between their worlds. The artifact was said to hold the power to change the fate of both humans and Zorixians. But what if it didn't? What if instead of bringing peace, it caused even more destruction? Despite these fears, they pressed on, determined to find the artifact before it fell into the wrong hands. They had learned that the factions within the Zorixian Empire, particularly those who opposed any alliance with humans, were already searching for it. The discovery of the artifact could tip the balance of power in the Empire, and it was unclear who would control it once they found it. As they neared their destination, the landscape began to change. The forests gave way to a barren, rocky terrain, and the air grew thinner. The map indicated that they were close, but it also warned of dangers. There were ancient ruins ahead, hidden from view, and it was here, among the broken stones and forgotten temples, that the artifact was said to be buried. Jason looked at Ilara, their journey having brought them closer than ever before. "We're almost there," he said quietly. Ilara nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to get there first. We can't let anyone else find it before us." And so, they continued onward, knowing that the most crucial part of their mission was still ahead. Finding the artifact would be the easy part. What came next was the true test of their resolve. The ruins stood before them, ancient and silent, as though time itself had forgotten this place. Jason and Ilara had reached the final destination of their journey. The map had led them here, through harsh landscapes and hidden dangers, to a place that had not seen life for centuries. The air was thick with dust, and the stone structures loomed like forgotten giants, their carvings worn by the passing of time. There was something both awe-inspiring and eerie about the place, a sense of history that felt almost alive. Jason adjusted the pack on his shoulders and looked at Ilara. She seemed calm, but he could see the tension in her eyes. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for, the discovery of the artifact that could change everything. The Xerixian Empire, their people, and the humans who had come to this world all depended on it. But as Jason looked at the ruins, he felt a nagging doubt in his chest. What if the artifact wasn't the answer? What if it only brought more conflict, more division? Ilara broke the silence, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that loomed over them. "The artifact is somewhere inside these ruins. We just need to find it." Jason nodded, though his heart was heavy. The Xerixian Empire had been built on traditions of power and control, and the artifact was said to hold the key to immense strength. But who would wield that power? Would it be the ones seeking peace, or those who wanted to use it for conquest? They moved through the ruins, stepping carefully over broken stones and through the remnants of what might have once been great halls or temples. The deeper they went, the more they could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. There was a quiet, almost oppressive energy in the air. It was as if the ruins were watching them, holding their secrets tightly. The map had led them to a central chamber, hidden beneath layers of rubble. Ilara studied the walls, tracing the worn symbols with her fingers. They seemed to glow faintly, in the dim light, as if responding to her touch. Jason stood by, keeping watch, his thoughts racing. He could hear the faintest sounds of movement in the distance, the rustle of wind through the broken windows and the distant echo of footsteps. They were not alone. "We're close," Ilara said, her voice filled with quiet excitement. "It's here, somewhere." Jason stepped forward, examining the walls. The carvings on the stone were unlike anything he had seen before. Strange, almost alien symbols that seemed to shift and change when looked at from different angles. He couldn't make sense of them, but Ilara seemed to understand. She had spent her life learning the ancient ways of her people, and now that knowledge was their only hope. Suddenly, one of the stones in the wall shifted with a faint grinding noise. Ilara moved quickly, placing her hand on the stone, and with a deep rumble the wall parted, revealing a hidden passage. A rush of air escaped from within, carrying with it the scent of old stone and something else, something faintly metallic. Jason's heart raced. This was it. The artifact was beyond this door, and they were about to face whatever challenges it might bring. They stepped into the passageway, the walls closing behind them with a soft thud. The path was narrow, and the floor was slick with moisture, but they continued forward, guided by the faint glow of the symbols on the walls. The deeper they went, the more the passage seemed to widen, eventually opening into a large chamber. At the center of the room, on a pedestal of smooth stone, lay the artifact. It was small, no larger than a human hand, but it pulsed with an energy that was almost tangible. The artifact was a dark, metallic object, smooth and featureless, except for the faint markings that seemed to pulse with light. It was unlike anything Jason had ever seen. No human technology had ever been this advanced or this mysterious. He could feel the power radiating from it, and for the first time since arriving on Zorix, he realized how much was riding on this moment. Ilara stepped forward, her face a mixture of awe and determination. It's beautiful, she whispered. Jason watched her closely, feeling the weight of her words. This artifact had the potential to change everything, to create a lasting peace between their people, or destroy it all. We need to be careful, Jason said, his voice low. We don't know what this thing can do. If we use it wrongly. Ilara turned to him, her expression serious. I know. But I've seen the future of Zorix, Jason. It's divided, full of fear and hatred. If we don't act now, it will destroy us. We need to bring the humans and Zorixians together before it's too late. Jason nodded. He understood what was at stake, but he also understood the dangers of wielding such power. He had seen enough in his life to know that power could corrupt, could twist intentions and turn allies into enemies. The decision wasn't simple, and the weight of it pressed down on him. Let's take it back, he said, taking a deep breath. We'll bring it to the Queen, to Ilara's people. They deserve to know about it. But as he reached for the artifact, something unexpected happened. The room seemed to tremble and the lights flickered. A voice echoed through the chamber, low, ancient, and powerful. You have come too late, the voice said. The artifact is not meant for you. Jason froze, his hand hovering just above the artifact. Ilara's eyes widened, and she stepped back, her face pale. Who is that? Jason asked, his heart pounding in his chest. The Guardians, Ilara whispered, her voice trembling. They were here to protect the artifact, to ensure it was never used by anyone unworthy. Jason looked at her, and then at the artifact, realizing with a sinking feeling that the true test was only beginning.